We're joined now by our senior counsel for global affairs, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Secretary Pompeo, I want to get right to it because there's a lot going on here in our country and a lot, of course, with the president overseas. President Biden, he landed in Israel today, and he's claimed that the relationship with Israel and the United States is deeper and stronger than ever. I have a feeling, I'm going to ask you this, I have a feeling I know your answer, but do you buy that at all?
Well, Jordan, it's not whether I buy it or not. The Israeli people know that's just not true.
Yep.
The Israeli leadership and the people in Israel can see clearly that when Hamas attacked Israel just weeks after the Biden administration took office, it took them days to just make a simple statement to say the Israelis have the right to defend themselves. And when there were arguments inside the Democrat Party about actually underwriting Iron Dome, or when we decide, we're going to try and cut a deal with Iranians that will give a clear pathway to a nuclear weapon in that theocracy, those authoritarian thugs in Iran, I think the Israeli people can see that is very different from how I behaved when I was Secretary of State, how America behaved during my time. And they know that creates risk for them, and we should all know that creates risk for us here in the United States as well.
So, Mike, the Jerusalem Post has a headline, and this is what it reads: Biden's visit, and then it says colon, when a politically weak president meets an interim prime minister. They're talking about the fact that you got a president that is definitely viewed internationally as weak right now. You've got Israel going through their fifth election in 3 years. And at the same time, you've got a PLO, which is a terrorist organization, let's be clear. And they're demanding that in order for there to be substantive meetings with the president and substantive progress, that three things have to happen. One, they will remove Israeli recognition and they will cut their security ties unless Israel gives them these access to points and land and more money and all of this. And I say to myself, and you know this as well as anybody in the world, if Israel were to cut its security ties with the Palestinian leadership, with Mahmoud Abbas, he would last about 20 minutes before Hamas would take over.
Yeah. Some of this is complicated, Jay. Some of this is really straightforward. You just highlighted the straightforward piece.
Right.
The security in Judea and Samaria, the security in the entire region is dependent upon a capable Israeli security force. The fact that President Biden, given his domestic challenges, is there meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, probably telling him, "Don't worry, we're going to set up a consul in Jerusalem," is deeply destabilizing for the region and bad for the United States, and certainly bad for those of us who believe that Israel is the rightful homeland of the Jewish people. Abbas is weak. He is corrupt. He has no incentive to make any kind of deal with any Israeli leader, let alone as they're making their way through their governmental changes as well. And we shouldn't forget, the Gaza Strip still sits there with Hamas controlling the joint. And the combination of those two, terrorists in Gaza Strip and the corrupt leader in Judea and Samaria, is not something that's going to lead to increased prosperity. It's why we went the path of the Abraham Accords. It's why we were isolating Iran as never before. And when I think that maybe Israel is going to be asked by Mahmoud Abbas to cut security ties, that is a recipe for danger and the reason and loss of life, both Israeli life and loss of life for people in the west part of the Jordan River as well.
Secretary Pompeo, one of the issues that's interesting about this trip is that you've got also a visit to Saudi Arabia. You wrote on Fox News, the president's trip to Saudi Arabia will likely not correct his egregious policy missteps. What do you see as the outcome? Like, what? I mean, is he going there to beg for oil, for gas? We get that that's part of it, but what comes out of this meeting ultimately?
I think he was getting differing counsel from his team, and finally President Biden said, "Fine, I'll go." Remember, he campaigned on eliminating fracking and energy production in the United States and making the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia a pariah state. That's a recipe for high gas prices and people being unable to afford to cool their homes in the summertime. And that's what they're up against. And so they're trying to go scramble to say, we did our part. We tried to put this relationship back in place. I've heard some good language from some on the team. They talk about trying to integrate the Arab nations, Israel, the Gulf states. I think that's all a good thing. That's a corollary, a follow-on to the Abraham Accords. But boy, when you say that there are no socially redeemable qualities of the leadership of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and you're going to make them a pariah nation, Godspeed. Good luck. And by the way, and then sit across the table from the Iranians. That is not the kind of thing that actually delivers less risk to the United States of America.
I was just thinking about that. We have an office in Jerusalem, and have had that office for a long time. So we've been there negotiating when there's been a lot of conflict. As you know, I've gone to the International Criminal Court multiple times, representing Israel's interests. They don't recognize the jurisdiction of the court, but we went in to say this is the position, and have been successful. I mean, so far the ICC, shockingly, with this new prosecutor, has not been near as aggressive and over the top as the predecessor. Having said all of that, you worked on significantly reshaping the Middle East. And you mentioned the Abraham Accords, and this was historic. This was more successful than the Oslo Accords. It was more successful than Camp David. It built on a process that it has tremendous potential. And as if this administration is saying, well, Mike Pompeo did that, so we're not going to do it, even though they know it was successful and is successful even today.
Hey, Jay, one should never have their policy be vindictiveness or we're going to do X because the guys we don't like very much did not X, right? You should try and get it right for America. There were a handful of things that President Obama left for us that we tried to build on, right? We're just trying to do that thing to put our people first, to put the American people first. And, what about party or politics? It was about security and prosperity. It does appear that they've headed down this path that says, well, we've got to go get back in the JCPOA because Trump and Pompeo got out. We have to go deal with a boss because the previous administration built out the Abraham Accords, just kind of telling the Palestinians, we're not going to let you have a veto on peace in the region. I hope the cooler heads prevail and non-political heads inside the Biden team prevail, and they can go build on what we did. It doesn't belong to Republicans. It belongs to America. And, I always think about our young men and women, so many who fought and risked their lives in the Middle East. If we get this right and do this well, the risk that some president someday may have to send them to go fight and risk their lives and in that place that's proven so difficult for so many decades will be greatly reduced. And that should be the mission of President Biden on this trip and every American leader as we move forward.
You tweeted yesterday, as Mexico's president was with President Biden at the White House before he left to go overseas, and a meeting, people trying to figure out exactly what the Mexican president meant by, was he taking a swipe at actual conservatives in America? Or do you mean conservative policies? I mean, he is a leftist, but you quoted, you tweeted out, there remains a crisis on the southern border, even though Biden and Harris ignore it and the mainstream media aren't interested in reporting on it. I mean, as we speak right now, there's Fox News is reporting they can't even see the end of the amount of people that are crossing the Del Rio sector over the Rio Grande right now. I mean, there's just people coming out of the woods in droves right now. I mean, what could each month, and we know the June numbers aren't out yet, but we know it's going to hit another record. What can we do right now to affect change on the Biden status quo? I mean, I feel like the November elections are very important, but also talking about solutions that worked under the administration you worked in. People in Texas have been calling us, Secretary Pompeo, saying things were greatly improved in those 4 years.
Oh, Jordan, this is a conundrum because you have an administration that just doesn't even want to address this, doesn't want to think about it. Is literally kowtowed to the most progressive elements, the most open border crowd inside of their party. And to watch what's going on, we all know. We saw the loss of life that took place there now two weeks back, right? Dozens of people that died as a result of these failed border policies. We know what this means, not just on the southern border. God bless these governors in Arizona and Texas who are trying to do their best. But we know what this means to people all across America. These illegals are going to end up all over the United States, and they're going to engage in activity that will be detrimental to the things that we value so much here. The tools that we have at hand are to speak about it, to be honest and frank, to highlight the risks that happen to the United States of America when we have an open border as we have today. And then elections matter. We had a policy. It was called Remain in Mexico. It delivered a deeply reduced flow of illegal immigrants into our country. We ought to simply go back to that. It would put us in a very sound place.
I want to go to Lori's call in Texas Online too, Secretary Pompeo. Hey, Lori, welcome to Secular. You're on the air.
Hi, Lori.
Thank you for taking my call. We are from a little town called Quemado, which is just south of Del Rio.
Yep.
We're right across the street from the Rio Grande. We have a relief ministry that we've served for 22 years. At this point, things have become so difficult that our ministries aren't afraid to basically cross the border.
This is the problem Mr. Secretary. You've got an organization that's giving relief to people across the border, and now they can't even do their function.
Too dangerous.
Too dangerous.
Oh my goodness! I've heard similar stories that, Lori, breaks my heart. Bless you for all the work you're doing to try and help these people who are in difficult circumstances. But the responsibility of the federal government is to get this right. I'm glad the governors are trying their best. But in the end, it's the federal government's responsibility to protect American sovereignty, to secure our borders, to protect you and your people who are trying to do really great work to make life better for those who are really struggling. When it becomes too dangerous for folks who are trying to provide aid and comfort, sort of the best of America, you got it wrong.
You're absolutely right. Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Secretary, we appreciate it. As always, Mike Pompeo, of course, is our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs.